Hello everybody, and welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Group. So with that, I do want to hand it over to our co-chairs, Douglas Freeman and Jim Raines, to get going with the end of our multiple part session here on meetings with a Contract Administration Practice Group. Douglas and Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome everyone.
Matthew, if you want to go to the first slide, we'll just for a second recap where we were. Before today, in our last session, we talked about various types of meetings. First, in the pre-construction phase, either procedural, site mobilization, utility coordination, and actually meetings with the authorities having jurisdiction. Let's go ahead, Matthew. And so where we're going to start today, we had stopped at the meetings which we call progress meetings. And of course, these are meetings that are typically, I'll say most of these comments are to come with that. Typically, they are held at the project site, and they provide a forum for general discussion about the project as it relates to any issues that might be in existence, but particularly about the progress and how things are going. These are meetings that, depending on the type of delivery method for the project, could be, and the scope of the project, could be daily. They may be weekly meetings, or they may be monthly meetings. All of that would depend on the scope and, of course, the schedule. And typically, the folks that attend are the owner, the construction representatives, as I call them on the slide here, contractors, design builders, etc., the architects and engineers, consultants, and then these vary according to, again, the delivery method and the owner and the contract. You may have your consultants, subcontractors, suppliers, testing agencies, in some cases the authorities having jurisdiction over this. And so when this group is gathered, I've just captured a short portion of the items that are potential issues for discussion from the practice guide. And these are on pages 77 and 78 of the practice guide. But the things that you may be there to discuss, review and follow up of items that is spelled right and that you covered in your last meeting. What are things that we have taken care of and, or didn't take care of that have carried forward onto this meeting schedule or agenda. You may review current activities or critical items that need to be discussed as this group is together. They review the project schedule itself and what the status of that is. And of course, that schedule issue ebbs and flows over the life of the job. It may not be so critical in your first progress meeting, but it certainly becomes more and more critical as the end of the project draws near, particularly if the project isn't on schedule. You may review project submittals, shop drawings, any kind of issues that exist with product data coming in for review, being provided in the field for use. You may talk about corrective requirements that need to be taken care of. And we've talked frequently in the past about non-conforming work. These progress meetings are great opportunities with this group gathered to be sure that work that is non-conforming has been established as such and has been addressed since the last meeting. They talk about materials and product delivery and whether or not there are any issues with getting things to the site. And again, it's a good time for candid conversation about how those things may be affecting the project, whether or not the owner, your client, has a requirement for materials that they are providing to be implemented in with those that the contractor is bringing to the site. These are great opportunities to review progress payments and whether or not the right people are there to review the progress payment is critical and is an opportunity to look in detail and also to have a chance to help your client be more familiar with the process of going through a review of a pay application and actually processing that payment. It's a great time to talk about the documentation of any changes or modifications and review the status of those, whether they're being processed as they need to be, as well as any other action items that you may have the opportunity to review as a group. And I've done work with several architects who make a very poignant moment out of asking one question during the progress meeting that they have, and that is there anything, absolutely anything, holding up the progress on this project that you are waiting for or expect from the architect and engineer, from the owner, and from any state agency if they are involved, so that there is documentation on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, however often we're having these meetings, that in fact there is nothing holding up the progress of the project. So I talked a long time there. I should have paused in between those, but are there any items that you want to go back and expand on?
Well, I would just add to the list of discussion topics is not that you necessarily need to discuss it during the meeting, but at those meetings is an ideal time to keep a check on the record drawings of the contractors to maintain, to make sure he's keeping those current. You certainly don't want, and I'm sure we've all been there, when you get to the end of the job and you get the record drawings and nothing or very little has been marked up. And it's a lot harder to go back and get those things updated properly at the end of the job than to just keep an eye on them as you get together at these meetings and make sure that they're being maintained. The other word of caution I would put out there is making sure that people don't wait until a meeting before they bring an issue up, especially when you have meetings on a weekly or every other week basis. I've seen people sometimes have a tendency to say, well, we got a meeting in 3 or 4 days, I'll just wait and we can discuss it at the meeting. And then there's 3 or 4 days that have gone by when it's possible that the issue could have been resolved a lot quicker.
Absolutely. Matthew, are there any questions that anybody has? Any hands raised?
No, at this point we are good to go.
Okay. Well, let's go to the next slide, and we can come back to questions if anybody has them. The next category, type of meeting that we're going to talk about are the contractor-subcontractor meetings. These two are typically held at the project site. They may be in the contractor's office if they are preliminary, especially in the process of buying out the project and making agreements for acquisition of materials, etc. These are set up to provide a forum for project coordination and discussions between the various contractors about sequence of work, delivery of materials, laydown space, and actually how the project will work in the actual footprint of the job site. These two could be daily, weekly, monthly, depending again on the scope of the project and the schedule and how tight that is. And these would include the construction representatives, either the contractor, design builder, subcontractors, suppliers, manufacturers' representatives, and possibly the owner may be there, again, depending on the delivery of materials and whether they are involved in the supply of work to be installed under the contract for the project. And also the architects or engineers may be involved. Typically those are less involved in the contractor-subcontractor meetings. And to be honest with you, my personal opinion is that maybe we should change that as an industry. if we understood them were more involved in the contractor-subcontractor relationship, where we might be invited into that conversation. I think that it could be helpful to a project to have access to answers and responses early in the contract schedule, in the construction schedule. So there are items that would be discussed, important project issues, and again, this is just a short sample of the lists that are on page 78 and 79 of the project guide. But these offer the opportunity to review critical action items between the contractor and her sub. They're an opportunity to talk about schedule. If any of you have spent any time in these sorts of meetings or have worked on the general contractor side, this might be where the screaming and hollering occurs when the lead contractor is working out her schedule for her sub. They can be very animated discussions. It's an opportunity to talk about the submittals and any issues that are occurring in the submittals, and I guess this is one of the reasons that I encourage our involvement here. Often I think that the submittal process drives the schedule more than the construction drives the schedule, and if we were able to help move that along in a more timely manner, we may see a positive result on the project schedule itself. And I personally have used some of these meetings as an opportunity to actually do the submittal or shop drawing review. If you will, everyone is on the site in the trailer that needs to look at a product, that needs to make comment about it, that can actually agree that this is an appropriate submittal and can thoroughly do a review, then it's a great opportunity to do so. And I've seen that build real teamwork and a real team focus and effort. They see that as an architect, engineer, or even the owner, that you really do want to respond in a timely manner and keep the project moving, keep the momentum in the job. So this might be an opportunity to try that. This is also a meeting where directive requirements are addressed, any work that needs follow-up or additional items that need to be taken care of. And particularly is important time to talk about materials and product delivery, whether the sequence of things coming to the job is in a manner that is needed for it to be included in the construction. Doug, any follow-up on those items?
Coming into those meetings, you can learn quite a bit about how that job is going from just sitting and being an observant at those meetings. As Jim is saying, it is a good opportunity that we should probably take advantage of more than we do. I would caution, though, that there are times, and it's not our meetings, that you need to be respectful to your contractor and subcontractors. And I know I've been to some meetings where there's issues that they want to talk about that they don't want me or the owner to know about. And they will either schedule those at another time or ask us to step out and let me talk to this guy. So just be mindful of that and be respectful of that.
Absolutely. Matthew, any hands raised?
Yeah, there's actually one question that popped in right at the start of this slide here from Jim. He was wondering, is it a good idea to tie payment approvals to record drawing and system and schedule updates?
Ooh. Doug, you want to go first?
I'll go first. I think it's an excellent idea. We typically do it. I typically do it. I will typically try to schedule the review of the draft payment application so that I have it at the time that we have the meeting, so I can be out on site, check quantities of the materials that are supposed to be stored on site. You're there on site already, you can verify that. You can put your eyes on the record drawings. Yeah, he's keeping those things updated. So I think it's an excellent idea.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. If you tie those things together and you do that from the very beginning, we talked about making information in the pre-bid conference you have, in the pre-construction conference that you have. There's no reason for any surprise. Lay this out as a foundation of the way that you're going to operate on the project, and then absolutely tie those things together. You need to have told everyone in your specifications that your intention is to do so, and then stick with that. And I like Doug, have seen a lot of positive results from tying those things together. But it makes sense for them to be tied together. There are some agencies that we work with here in North Carolina that, in fact, require them to be tied together. So I think it's a great idea, too. Matthew, let's go to the next slide. The next type of meeting we're going to talk about here is pre-installation meetings. A critical part of getting ready in the early phases of construction. First, they're held at the project site, typically, and they provide the opportunity for project procedures to be discussed, coordination and phasing discussions, of course, between the architect and engineer and owner, but particularly between the contractors as to how they are going to touch one another's work, if you will. And it's based on the complexity of the installation and the interrelationships of other work as to how detailed and how long these meetings would take. Whether it is a once quick or multiple times in great detail, and that should be planned accordingly to the work that's going to be installed and how it's going to be touched by others' work. This is an opportunity for quality assurance and is a portion of the Part 1 general descriptions in each specification section. So it's really important to again, as the author of these specifications, following your own rules and regulations should drive where and when you have these pre-installation meetings. It's a coordination meeting, and typically because of that, the superintendent will be responsible for chairing and running the meeting. It's something that should be held well in advance of the installation schedule. We certainly don't want any surprises when the installation gets started, and having this meeting early enough will allow the ordering of materials and having the appropriate personnel on the site. And again, the specific contractors that are installing that work, as well as any work that's integrated into that in the end, are the ones that should be there. The construction representatives, like the contractor, design builder, the subcontractors and suppliers, perhaps there are manufacturers representatives that need to be included to be sure that things are done appropriately. And also the owner and the architect engineer typically are there as well. So what's critical is to have the right individuals there. I'm sure that we've seen, I'll use Terrazzo as an example, where the Terrazzo team that comes out may be a field superintendent or a roading superintendent. He speaks the language and understands the items that you're going to care about, and he gets in his truck and leaves. And the actual foreman that runs the crew that's going to work on your site, when she arrives, she hasn't had the opportunity to have this pre-installation discussion. She wasn't there for that conversation. And so it's important that you invite in the most professional and kind way you can to have the right field foreman, backup foreman, the right people that are going to be on the dirt on your site so that they can have the opportunity of what may be learned in this meeting. And in that meeting, you may talk about again, this is a short sample of what is on page 80 in the practice guide, but the review of work access may be talked about, and again, laydown areas and staging, what the required conditions are, environmental conditions are important. This is another item of concern, having the architect and owner there and allowing, if I can presume it this way, allowing yourself to be the bad person as it is presented to these installers. Look, they expect this environmental control to be like the specifications require. I understand you didn't do it that way on your last job, but this is not your last job. And we expect to enforce that criteria here. So it's an opportunity to go over that. To also talk about the schedule and what's going to happen with the schedule and the submittal itself, whether or not it has been reviewed and is acceptable or not, or whether it's still in process. And this is also an opportunity during the pre-installation phase to take a look at samples or mock-ups. And I go back to the Gerardo example. If you are going to have a particular installer, then whatever your mock-up is going to be, you need to stick with your guns and ask for the crew that's going to do the work to be the crew that's going to build the mock-up, if it's something you're going to see done in the field. It's important to know the quality of the product. It's important for the owner to have an opportunity to see that. And I've had the experience where mock-ups were unacceptable to the owner, and there wasn't a way to work that out, and we were lucky that we saw it beforehand. I've also had them be a mock-up done by the A team, and then the C team showed up to do the work, and they didn't match. And it became a real contentious issue to get the project straightened out. So the intention here with these pre-installation meetings is in hopes of avoiding that, sure.
Just to re-emphasize the comment about having the right individuals there, as Jim said, make sure that it is the people that are actually going to be doing the work that are at those meetings, that foreman, that superintendent. I would go as far as just put that requirement in the specifications when you're in your Division 1 spec and you're talking about pre-installation conferences, put in there that the actual on-site job foreman needs to be in attendance at the meeting. Jim mentioned reviewing submittals. We typically put in our front-end specs that the submittals have to be reviewed and approved prior to having the pre-installation conference. It's good to have those. You can pull them out, look at them, coordinate, resolve any unresolved issues. That's what these meetings are for. And if you don't have those submittals there, you're missing that opportunity to take advantage of that. The last comment, well, not the last, two more comments. One, referring to the mock-up that Jim had mentioned, getting the A team to do the mock-up and then the C team shows up on site and then the samples don't match. This is a experience that I've had on a project where we got a mock-up that was perfect. And it was a large precast job with a short schedule. And we had the discussion, this mock-up is perfect. Are we going to get perfect pieces when we're getting all this precast sent out here? If you're saying this is it, this is what we're going to expect. If you can't do that, you need to take this mock-up back and give us one that's going to be a true representative of what we're going to get. So that was a case where we actually rejected a mock-up that was perfect because we knew we weren't going to get perfect work on the job. So we wanted to get something that we all knew was going to be the quality we were going to get, but it was still going to be acceptable to everybody. So keep that in mind. And the last comment is these pre-installation conferences, don't think of them as just a one product, one contractor thing. When you're having your pre-installation conference for brick, if you're doing building skin and you've got a curtain wall, if you've got metal panel and you've got other materials that are going to be interfacing with it, they should be sitting on at that meeting too, so that they're all coordinated together.
Absolutely, and it just to touch one more time on the mock-ups and the samples. Frequently we specify a sample that has the opportunity to be used in the final product, and of course that requires another level of conversation about protection of that material and where it's going to be stored, etc. So those are important pieces to delve into that Part 1 general section of your specifications to be sure you're doing everything that you said you were going to. I had personal experience on a project where because the material and the product were exactly what the specification was written around, down to the manufacturer and the model number, they had pre-chosen the fabric colors. There was no decision to be made that wasn't included in the specifications when the project was bid. So the decision was made to not require the sample and the mock-up. And unfortunately, the owner would not accept the product once it was installed because, in their opinion, it was too narrow, that this was a seat, that the seat was too narrow. And even though it met every requirement of the specifications, unfortunately, that architect was on the losing end of that mediation and had to replace the product. So when you say you're going to have a sample, or when you say in your specifications you're going to require a mock-up, it's critical to do it. And this is the meeting where you get it looked at and document that with everyone involved. Actually, do we have any hands up?
We don't have any questions at this time, Jim, so I've just moved on to the next slide for you.
Okay, perfect. This is a meeting that everybody's excited about. All right, once it's been that 3.5-year-long construction project that you're ready to finish and move on to the next one. And so this would be a closeout meeting. I think too frequently we miss this opportunity as practitioners, and this is a meeting that we could make mean as much to our marketing department as anything that they may do in a year. So at this meeting, this would provide an opportunity for the project to be drawn to conclusion, and then all the closeout procedures that are in the specifications would be met here, would be gone through. It provides the opportunity to have a yet final review of the document submission requirements. Of course, this should have been going on during the whole project, but typically information has amassed during construction that needs to be pulled into some cohesive form that is delivered to the owner, and this is an opportunity to go back over what is needed to be sure that it all is there. And typically these final documents would include the owner's and operation manuals, record drawings, as we discussed a little earlier, that you've been keeping tabs on throughout the project. And this is an opportunity to go through that information as a group. It could be the last time that you see a lot of the individuals that have been involved with the project, and so it would be my advice to go into great detail. I'll set this meeting up to take the time it needs to go through this documentation. So typically the attendees again would be the construction representatives, the contractor, design builder, subcontractors, suppliers and manufacturers reps, particularly if they're involved with any kind of process that is going on through the project, like commissioning. The owner's reps, and that owner group may grow and shrink throughout this process as appropriate for the kind of meeting you're having. So in this closeout meeting, this might be an opportunity for the owner to have all of his personnel there that are going to be involved with the management and maintenance of the facility, so that they have an opportunity to ask their questions. Of course, you hope this isn't the first time that they've been included in communication with products and materials that are going on into the project, but this would be an opportunity where the owners group may be a little larger for this final meeting. And then, of course, the architects and engineers, typically the group that would be involved in the closeout meeting. And again, I've listed a short piece of the list of what may be discussed, where requirements didn't spell right. I apologize for these spelling errors, y'all. That's just embarrassing. There's been several, but this is a short sample of what's shown on pages 80 and 81 that might be a part of what you would review in this closeout meeting. And first and continually to becoming more important, the commissioning process and system startup, which of course has been going on throughout the end stages of the job as things are being brought online and systems are being tested. This is an opportunity for demonstrations and training. Frequently we see in specifications that folks want to have those sessions videoed so that they can go back and reteach their personnel, re-inform folks that maybe come on as new employees. This would be an opportunity to review the punch list documentation and correction of those items and being sure that everything is up to standard. And we laugh and talk about this being the final or the final. This might be the actual time when you establish that the punch list is owner done, not just architect done or contractor done, but that it's actually owner done and accepted. This may be the time that you're, and if it's not, then you may be establishing what the definition of owner done is, so that folks can get finished. You may be reviewing final cleaning requirements and turnover to the owner, as well as the contractor actually demobilizing from the site. So these are some of the things that would be typical parts of these closeouts. But then there may be more than one of these, for sure. Doug, do you have things to add to that, man?
Not a lot to say on this one. Just don't wait until the closeout meeting to start talking about closeout. It goes a lot faster and a lot smoother if you are focusing on it earlier and making sure the stuff is falling into place and being done as the work is moving along. Closeout seems to have a tendency to want to drag on sometimes, and we want to do all that we can to prevent that from happening. Matthew, any hands or questions?
Yeah, there's actually a question/comment from Jim, I think, that ties into what you just said, Douglas. He's asking, on a medium to small project, would it be good practice to discuss closeout requirements during a progress meeting at, say, 75% complete?
I would say yes. And as you said, it does tie into what I was just saying. Don't wait until the job is 90% complete and start talking about all the stuff that has to happen to get the project closed out. I would start early. In fact, on my pre-construction conference meeting agenda, I talk about it there. And I'll let everybody know this is what is going to be expected at the end of the job. We'll get into it in more detail later. It's in the specs, but it's one of the items on my pre-construction conference agenda. I don't think that's... Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I was just going to say I've had that same experience as Doug, and actually have seen architects who attach to the pre-construction conference minutes this list of what their firm considers to be done. These are the things that will happen these are the documents that will be provided to us, these are the meetings that we will have, and that they actually begin that process, as Doug just said, at the pre-construction conference. And then, as we've talked about, there's sort of a check-off on that as you go out monthly to review the pay application, that these documents are being transmitted like they need to be and are being put in the right hands for review and acknowledgement before you get to the very end.
All right, we have a few additional questions here. One coming in from A. Raman. If there is a confusion between final document requirements and the original specs, which one overrules?
Well, you go ahead, Doug.
I'm not quite sure I'm understanding the question, so Jim, you go ahead and
I was just going to say, if I understand it right, I think that the specifications that you've established or have written, published, and have been a part of the project are a part of your contract documents. And so in that, you've spelled out explicitly what the contractor has to provide as final documentation. Now, that may be and so I would say that the specifications are what rules and what has to be provided. But I will say there's some ambiguity there. That's a bad word. There's some generalization there, such as this. The authority having jurisdiction has to sign off on a final inspection, and they may require some particular form to their location has to be executed and turned in. You may just reference that as meeting the requirements of the authority having jurisdiction, but you may not have that final document spelled out and exactly what it is. The contractor would be obligated to provide that because they've got to meet what the code requirement, what the code official says.
All right, we have one additional question here coming from Larry. I'm going to do it out of order. So he starts with, I worked on a project in which the contractor brought in a closeout specialist and reassigned the PM and the JS to another project. So how do you prevent the contractor from replacing the PM and job superintendent during the closeout process?
I would say that you would address that again in your specifications, in your contract documents, and specifically I would think the place to do it would probably be in the general conditions or supplemental general conditions. And I've typically seen language in there that says that the superintendent or project manager or both are going to be assigned to the job through completion and that they cannot be replaced without the consent of the owner. And so if he wants to switch out and have a closeout specialist, he can certainly add them, but he cannot remove the other folks from the job unless the owner is in agreement. That's, I think, the way I would suggest to deal with that. I think it's best for all parties, including the contractor, for him to keep the folks that have been on the job, that have the history, that have the relationships, keep them on the job and get it done quickly and properly, as opposed to moving them off to the next job, because the message that that's sending to the owner is they don't care about this one anymore. You know, they smooshed me to get the project, we gave them the project, everything was hunky-dory, and then you could leave a bad taste in their mouth even if the project has gone fairly smoothly, and you disappear at the end. It's my opinion, sends the wrong message to the owner about how you conduct your business. That goes true for architects too, is I guess we could have a tendency to do that sometimes too. We've got to project manager that's been following the project through, even if he hasn't been the one that's been out in the field, and then all of a sudden towards the end of the job he disappears because he's off on the next project. It just is not the customer attention that I think we should be giving.
That's why I love doing these with you, Doug, because that's a very reflective thought, and it's very true. We tend to do that as firms, and yet we may not want to recognize that it's the very same thing that the contractors are doing, and trying to take that really good foreman off to get the next job off to a bang. When this happens, I always hope that, it's sort of like the designated hitter rule. They're putting in somebody who's this closeout specialist because it's what they're really good at. But it seems like that's not the way it turns out. It's always been my experience that it's someone that hasn't been up to speed on the job, or they've been up to speed on 8 jobs, and they're just so confused and overworked that they don't really know where we are or what the outstanding issues are or what needs doing to close it out. And it never is a smooth transition. I have had on some bigger jobs where the designated project manager and the designated lead superintendent went off to other projects, but they had brought in at, say, the 70% complete time frame a finished carpenter who had been on the job for some months and who understood, who had been, I guess, educated enough with the issues and the items. They were there when the punch list started. These are jobs where you may do a punch list in phases, so they were brought in when you did that first phase punch list, and they were on the job. Those transitions weren't so bad, but again, it was less than optimum because it wasn't the person who'd been there for 2.5 years. So I think Doug nailed it. Is you just have to try to enforce what the specifications say, that they're not going to switch teams on.
All right, then Larry had a follow-up to that saying, so then the supplementary conditions should specify completion as final, not substantial?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Substantial.
Go ahead.
Substantial completion is not the end of the job. When all the work that the contractor is contracted to do is complete and accepted by the owner, that is final completion. That's submitting the final payout, the record drawings, removing the job site sign, all of that stuff. He's got to be done, demobilized, and not owe anything work-wise, and then he's done.
It's the definition in the firms that I've worked with, and the way they describe it is that the building can be used for its intended purpose. So let's say it's a school. Until you can put students in a classroom and teach them, it's not finished. And if it's the owner's furniture that's the only thing keeping it from being finished, that's one thing. But if it is that you only have a substantial completion but not a final completion because there's some outstanding issue as far as the inspections department is concerned, then it's not finally complete and you can't teach kids there, but the clock is still running. And I'll hush, I'll say this, and I've seen architects define in their specifications what they mean by substantial completion and what they mean by final completion. So that's in the supplementary general conditions. There's no confusing those items. It's right here on page 22.
The AIA documents themselves define substantial completion, as Jim said, is the point when the construction is such that the building can be used for its intended purposes. And then I believe they also define final completion, and that's when the architect signs off on the final payment application. And the architect should not sign off on that final payment application until everything is done. So they are two very different things. And I'm going to give my story about substantial completion that Jim's heard before, and I think I've even said it on one of these previous webinars, is if you're doing a sports arena and the contractor has done everything except for label the seats is row A1, B2, he's not substantially complete. Because if the owner intends on using that facility to sell tickets, so you have a specific seat that you're going to sit in, and there's, especially if there's different pricing levels based on where the seat is in the stadium, if you can't sell those tickets because those seats aren't numbered, then the contractor is not substantially complete, even if that's the only thing left to be done. Because the building cannot be used for its intended purpose. It could be used. You could get in there, the bathrooms operate, the field is green and lush, and you can play football on it, and it could be used, but the owner can't use it how he intended to use it, and that's to sell tickets and not have folks in their designated seats.
All right. Well, this has brought up I was just going to say this brought up a few additional conversation questions here. One last one here, I guess, from Larry. I think he's playing Stump the Speakers today. So what do you do when the OA agreement expires after so many days after substantial completion, but closeout has not yet been completed?
That, too, is addressed in AIA documents in the contract. Haven't looked at one recently. I believe the typical language in there, and if you don't like what's in there typically, you can certainly change and negotiate with the owner, is that the architect services typically are, I believe it's 60 days, or it could be 90 days after substantial completion is when they are supposed to terminate. And if they go on beyond that, then it's an additional service. And if you're in that situation, and that's a discussion that you need to have with your owner, that work is dragging out, I'm putting in more time, my contract says it's additional services, here's my fee for additional services. It may be that it's an owner that you've done a lot of work with, and you may decide that you don't want to have that conversation and you're just going to do the work, but that's a contract issue. It should be addressed in your contract with the owner.
And it's something that...
I'm sorry, my last...
Can I add? No, go ahead.
The owner would have recourse against the contractor to seek damages from the contractor for taking too long to finish up. And again, all that's typically in the contract language.
Right, and I was just going to add in there that this would be something that you had talked to the owner about in advance of it happening, hopefully in these progress meetings, as you're watching the end draw near and knowing that it's not going to happen. This wouldn't be a surprise to them at this point, hopefully.
Yes.
And then we have one last question here from Barry Quick. Should you ever issue a substantial completion without a C of O?
I don't see how you can.
I love these questions.
I don't see how you can.
Like they've been riding around with us. Yeah, I agree with Doug. I don't see how you could, and I think probably many of us have been in a position where the owner is anxious to do their stocking, inventory, installation, and you get in a position where you're sort of kind of urged to do that. But I agree with Doug.
I don't see how the owner can use the building for its intended purposes if he doesn't have a certificate of occupancy. He can't occupy it.
Right.
And just because you have a certificate of occupancy doesn't mean that you have substantial completion either, because if you go back to the stadium example, you could certainly have a CO because the inspector doesn't care about the seats being labeled. But you would not meet that definition of substantial completion.
Well, it's a great comment and a great question because I've been in that scenario where, as Doug just said, and ours was flooring. There's so many people using polished concrete in our area now as a finished floor, and the building inspector came in. We weren't there. No one was on the site but the general contractor, and the building inspector handed the CO to the contractor, and there was no carpet on the floor. And it was in the contract, and the owner couldn't have their furniture installed because if they put it in the building, they'd have to take it out to put the carpet in to put the furniture back in. And this turned into a huge argument because then the inspector rescinded the CO, and of course the school system and the county inspections department worked for the same county commissioners, and they were liquidated damages, and the contractor said, you guys talked them into that, and now you're trying to do something to us you shouldn't. It was a big mess. It's another example of why you want to be on the site when there's a final inspection going on. But it really wasn't usable by the terms of the AIA contract that was signed. But that's an example, like Doug's saying, where the inspector didn't care. Matthew, you want to go to the next slide?
Sure can.
I'll just be quick here. And the last types of meetings are just those defined as other. That may be scheduled by various parties throughout the project. Safety meetings, which are very important for the job, but which the construction community has complete control over. They regularly occur, and those kind of meetings might be going on. There may be some internal project management changes that go on a site where those create a need for meetings. So there's always that other category of things that may be going on. I'll put another one in here that I've been familiar with is community meetings, where you're doing work close to a community and they want to know how things are going, and so there may be some walkthroughs that are scheduled with the contractor where they might be media visits that would be meetings that the architect and the owner would host. Anything else, Doug, that you know of as far as others?
No, so we're running out of time. Just real quick on the safety meetings, I had an attorney once tell me that if you're in a progress meeting or any meeting and the contractor starts talking about safety issues, you need to get up and walk out. Now, I don't know that you need to be that extreme, but just do keep in mind that you're not responsible as a design professional for job site safety issues, and so be careful on being involved in any discussions about job site safety, so that you don't assume that responsibility.
Right. Well, Matthew, let's go to the last slide, and I just wanted to, you know what, I forgot about these. We're not going to have time to do those, are we? I guess let me just do this really fast. I had two in here, examples of meetings, tales of the good and the bad. And the tale of doing the right thing is you're making routine site visits to check progress. The gut speaks to you that something isn't right. In this example, the elevations of the brick, bless the contractor's heart, he had just done them backwards. They were the right bricks, they were just in the wrong places on the elevation. It was completely the contractor's error, and it wasn't just the mason. In this example, the project architect and the owner smelled blood. They felt that they were going to get a great deal out of this, a financial reward. And the truth was, if you stood back and looked at the building, the elevation looked great. It in fact got the community very excited when they saw it. And so after multiple meetings of going out, trying to be persuasive and be in a positive frame of mind, and a lot of good CA guy, mitigation, mediation, and negotiation. At the end of the day, they left it just like it was, and it's one of the most popular schools in the school system, all because of an error. So the point of doing the right thing and sharing in a meeting, that you don't just get led down a path because you think you may have an option to do something, but that you do the right thing. That doing the right thing is always right. Having an open mind in these meetings is a critical tool, that you're keeping everyone on a professional level. Now you can tell when I wrote this, because at the time I updated this slide, Washington was sort of falling on its face. Maybe still is, I don't know. But you know that owning can be a very useful tool, especially if you aren't the owner. You know, this contractor stepped right up and said, "Look, our bad. We'll fix it if you want us to." And you know, following up your documentation is everything. Once it was done, it was done, it was over, and we didn't talk about it again. Now, the next slide is a tale of something bad. If you go to the next one, Matthew, so in this first meeting experience, something that you need to be prepared for when you're having a meeting, not just the meeting itself and what you're going to go over, but how you get there. You know, getting into a two-seater airplane you didn't know you were flying into an airport that's really the sawed-off top of a mountain, which had its issues all by itself. You're working on a housing project in the very worst part of this rural community, where you're told to leave everything valuable in the plane before you go to the job site. When you get there, there are police that are staking out the buildings. They're in the buildings under construction because of drug sales across the street. And while you're in the meeting, you look up and see a mason coming into the construction trailer with a shotgun because he was in love and he was looking for revenge. So what are the lessons out of this? Go to the next slide. You need to be prepared for where you're going. Know the details. Know your travel arrangements, where you're going and how to get there. Talk about those details with your team and know your team. Stay aware of your surroundings, not just for safety, but for the actual review of the project. Plan ahead and be very well prepared for what you're getting into. I'm sorry I forgot about those at the end. We had a lot of good old wives' tales and stories there. I'm sure giving everybody a chance to throw theirs in. And so here is a chance for you to do that. Our last one for this year will be December 17th. We've asked you on occasions before to send in your ideas about what you would like to talk about, what you'd like to put on the table. If you could do that in the next week, Doug and Matthew and I can get our heads together and see what we can do to bring together information to present to you. But sorry I had to go through those so fast.
One last parting comment on my part. Start your meetings on time. Be respectful that there are a lot of participants that will be at these meetings, so you should start them on time. Stay on topic, stay on focus, cover what's on the agenda and wrap it up and be done. You can socialize and chit-chat and stuff before and after the meetings, but try to keep the meetings going. I had an owner not just owner, actually I've had several people comment to me after going through some meetings with me, said they appreciated the fact that we started on time, we stayed on topic, and we're hitting items that needed to be hit, and they just appreciated the fact that the meetings ran well. One last story. I will have my agenda, and I will go through my agenda, and typically during any meeting, especially on construction projects, people have their topics that they want to talk about, and you have a tendency to kind of jump around. I would, as I'm following my agenda, somebody, in this case it was the owner, his name was Frank, he would always want to talk about his issues. And I said, Frank, you're out of order. Hold on. I'm further on down my agenda. And after 2 meetings, he caught on, and we got through that project, and he commented on how well the meetings went. The next project I did with him, the very first meeting, the contractor that had not been with us on the previous project started talking about a topic. Frank said, wait, you're out of order, You got to follow this agenda. So it just is a story I like to tell. It shows that if you start on time, people will know that, well, they're going to start. I don't need to be late, otherwise I'm going to miss something. Stay on topic, stay in order, keep things flowing smooth, and people, I've found, tend to appreciate that. So again, if you've got suggestions, our emails are on this screen. Send us the topics, and we appreciate you guys joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, with that, everybody, ends this month's session of the Contract Administration Practice Group. Thank you all, and have a good day. Bye now.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.